Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for our second Twilight Seminar. Despite having tested this extensively yesterday afternoon, unfortunately our person at the other end of the line is getting an error message with the go-to meeting that we've set up. And we'll be able to hear her, we'll be able to see the slides that she's presenting, but we're not going to be able to see her. So that's the bit that we can't seem to get working right now. So Mallory Perry from Harvard University is on the other end of the line, and I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction to set some context for what this literature review is about and how it fits into our bigger process. And then I'm going to turn over to Mallory. And Mallory is going to give you kind of a brief verbal presentation of the information that is contained in the literature review. And then a little bit taking a slightly different twist from what we've done last time, in previous times with these Twilight seminars. I want to try to run kind of a brief open space session with all of you. And what that means is I'm going to give you an opportunity to pose questions that you would like to discuss at this point with the other people who are in this room. And people are going to choose a discussion to join. They're going to go off, have a discussion, and come back really briefly and report back. So the seminar will take place within the amount of time that we've specified, but this time we want to give you an opportunity because after the last session that we did, a lot of people expressed an opportunity to have gotten together and actually had kind of a more immediate discussion than a more passive kind of experience of listening to a presenter and doing a little bit of Q&A. So again, I want to do a little bit of context setting just before we get started. As you know, we do have 4 campuses. Right now, we're meant to have at least one of those campuses joining us electronically. They haven't signed on yet. When they do, they'll just begin hearing what we're talking about. The event that we're doing today is being recorded through GoToMeeting so that board members, teachers, parents, anyone can go onto the website after today and see this exact same thing that you're going to be seeing right now. They'll see what I'm doing, they're going to see Mallory's presentation, and they'll see your report out at the end of the day or at the end of the session following the open space piece. I want to point out that the work that SIM is doing right now, the Center for Inspiring Minds, we're actually doing on behalf of the head of school committee. Some people have had the idea that this is a SIM project or this is a SIM-led event. This is a year-long process that's being led by the head of school committee, which is Diane and Jeremy and Linda and Steve and Tony and Chris. Yeah, the reason that you're involved is that this is a research and development part of this year-long process aimed at developing a joint philosophy statement and a set of expected school-wide learning results. And when I say that this is a research part, the research actually takes on 2 different forms. It takes on a research form in that we've actually looked at the academic literature, we've looked at the research that informs the kinds of questions that we're asking at this point in time. But what you're doing right now in terms of your participation and what happens at the Big Think events, which I'm going to be talking about, is a different kind of research, and it's called participatory action research. And the idea behind that research is that it's drawing on the experience and expertise of all of those people who turn up on that day to participate. Those people are listening to presentations, they're filtering information, they're synthesizing information collaboratively, and they're giving us what we're calling practitioner insight. They're giving us their interpretation of what they're hearing and how it's relevant to ACS as a group of schools. And everything that comes out of this process will be produced and published in a practitioner insight report, which will be coming out just before we leave for the December break in preparation for the second half of the year. Now, interestingly, I said in the beginning that what we're trying to do is we're trying to develop a 4-school shared philosophy statement and set of expected school-wide learning results. What we have right now is for ACS International Schools, and when I say ACS International Schools, I mean all 4 campuses, we have a shared vision. That vision was developed through a very participatory process that lasted over a year. You all are familiar with the vision of Through Learning, Inspire All to Make a Difference. We also have 4 core values that came out of that process. But once you go below that level, what we have is we have a separate Cobham philosophy, we have a separate Egan philosophy, we have a separate Hillingdon philosophy, we have a separate Doha philosophy, and in addition to that, Doha actually has this new thing that none of our schools had developed before called a set of expected school-wide learning results. Now, Doha doesn't have those because it's special. Doha has those because those were a requirement of the particular accrediting body that we've chosen. The Western Association of Schools and Colleges requires all the schools who they inspect to develop a set of expected school-wide learning results. Now, the interesting thing about those is those results take into account academic development and academic achievement, but they include a whole range of dispositions and skills that we recognize as being valuable at all of our schools, but we haven't really articulated as things that we have an interest in eventually measuring. And that's where this comes in. So at the end of this, we'll have a shared philosophy and a shared set of these expected school-wide learning results. I wanted to just kind of briefly introduce this idea of frames. And George Lakoff, who's a cognitive linguist, which is kind of an interesting profession, kind of a nice hybrid, talks about frames as mental structures that shape the way that we see the world. And as a result of that, they shape the goals that we seek, the plans we make, the way we act, and what counts as a good or bad outcome of our actions. What I want to do in a moment is show you a set of frames that I think we're working with right now, because I think it'll help understand, again, the context of where we are right now and why we're taking this work on. Really critical to these frames is the language that we use. And a big part of philosophy statements and a big part of expected school-wide learning results is all about language. Any of you who've ever participated in a whole school process for developing those things recognize how important language is, how contentious it can become, how rich it can become, how descriptive it can be when you choose the right terms. And again, this idea that if you're going to think differently, you're probably also going to speak differently. So the language that you use signals your intention. And so language becomes very, very important. And a big output of this process as it goes through the year is going to be the production of a common language that we'll all use to talk about the things that we're trying to do. I wanted to start with these frames, and literally these are going to be in frames. And these are going to be a set of nested frames. And what I want to suggest is that probably the biggest frame we're working within right now, and it really has set boundaries for the work that we're doing with the big things and the education summits. This big frame holds our vision and our core values. So through learning, inspire all to make a difference, engage in community, be a catalyst for positive change, enrich the international experience, promote excellence through personal achievement. Now, the interesting thing about this frame is that this frame is hugely philosophical. This is like an aspirational kind of piece. But what we're being challenged to do now is almost create some scaffolding that connects this highly inspirational piece to the thing that we do day to day. So if you can think about this in terms of this is a number of steps, I'm going to show it as nested frames rather than steps. So within this frame, at the next level, just a quick thing about language. The language of our vision and core purpose implies a commitment to increasing learning's mastery, not just of core concepts, so not just academic growth and development, but also this idea that we're going to be transforming the learning related to skills, values, and beliefs, especially their sense of self-efficacy. This idea of through learning, inspire all to make a difference. That vision statement is through learning, prepare everyone to get into university. It's not through learning, prepare everyone to go on and get a job. It's through learning, inspire everyone to make a difference. And that's a very different kind of frame than one that would focus more specifically just on academic development. So within this next frame would fall the philosophy and the expected school-wide learning results. The reason that I want to point this out is that when we begin working with this frame has to fit within that first frame. So when we went out and started looking at things, we were looking at things that were relevant to that vision and those core values. We weren't looking at things that fell outside that. So already we've created some boundaries in terms of things that we're going to consider as part of this process. What will sit inside that is an education strategy. So we have our vision, we have our values, we have a philosophy, we have a set of expected school-wide learners. We've said philosophically what we're trying to achieve. We've given an indication of some of the things that we're trying to measure and some of the things that we value. We now begin to get very kind of practical and very kind of operational. Until we have those two things, it becomes really difficult to come up with a cohesive education strategy. So you begin to see the importance of this next level of information that we're working at. And that then follows education practice. And so then we have this huge challenge of connecting the vision and the values to the practice, but having the benefit of all these other intermediate steps in order to help us and guide us in doing that. So the big think two questions, the questions that we're considering both as we began the work on the literature review, as well as the questions we'll be discussing in our live event. What are we going to learn? how will we learn, and who's going to lead that learning? And you can begin to look at those questions and think about, whichever campus you work at right now, you can think about how those things are currently expressed within the philosophy statement that you have. These tend to be really big, important questions in a philosophy statement. What will we learn? How will we learn? And who's going to lead that learning? The two possible responses to those questions, you could take in two different extreme ways. You could come up with technical responses to those questions, and technical responses would refer to things that are familiar, things that are comfortable, things that address really, really clear challenges. Or some of the responses could be things that fall into this category of being more transformative. And transformative responses are typically in response to challenges that are highly complex, that you don't know an easy way to do it, and they require innovation. You sometimes kind of take on those innovative ideas with uncertainty as to what's actually going to come out of them. And again, that's the role of continuing research as we go forward. It's not just innovating, but actually figuring out what we produce as a result of innovating. So the brief that we gave to Mallory, who we're going to be hearing from in just a moment, is that we wanted her to look at the published peer-reviewed education literature. We did want her to look generally within the last 10 years, although if there were some foundation pieces that went back a bit further than that, we wanted her to look at those things too. But we wanted it to connect to and build on the vision and the core values. So we didn't want her to look at things that didn't have to do with the vision or core values. We didn't want her to look at opinions that went against our core vision and our values, because why would we want to spend time there? We've already committed to this is what we're about. And so that began to provide the frame. So she was looking at education concepts and theories that are in alignment with our transformation-focused vision and values. If we look at this process of literature reviews and big think events, in September, we published our first literature review called International School Education for a Changing World, which we still have paper copies of if you'd like to take a paper copy away with you today. The consultation that was done in connection with that was one of the inputs into our first big think. In our first big think, we were looking at this topic of international school education for a changing world. So we were looking at some ideas around futures thinking, some looking at data around where international schools have come from, how they're developing, how they're projected to change over the next 20 to 30 years. Today, we're introducing a second literature review, and this one is about teaching and learning for a changing world. And again, the types of teaching and learning that we're focused on are things that rise from our vision and core values. The results from this consultation, as well as a number of other things, will feed into our Big Think 2 event, which is on the 11th of November, which is in 2 weeks. I know that some of you will be involved in that event. It will be here at Cobham in the Performing Arts Center. We're expecting about 60 people. And one of the things that will be very different about the Big Think event, Big Think 2 event, is it will involve a lot more external experts. So there'll be lots of opportunities to build on what we've brought together in the literature review. And then again, I should point out that the literature review is one piece. So we have the literature review, and now we're also going to be hearing from a group of people who are practitioners in different fields. So we have Guy Claxton coming currently from King's College London, but formerly from the University of Winchester, where he ran the Center for Real World Learning. Is going to be talking about an educational theory that he's built a lot of his work around called expansive education. We have Christina Hinton coming for a second time, and this time Christina is going to have the opportunity to present on her area of specialization, which is the role of neuroscience in looking at challenges in teaching and learning. We have Nikki Smith coming from 12PR, and you may recognize 12PR as the organization that has produced our recent admission officers report, where we look at the role of the IB in terms of college admissions. She's going to be talking a little bit more about that report that they produced for us. We have Mark Barlow coming from the University of Surrey. He's the director of admissions. He's going to be talking about the kinds of things that universities are looking for in high school graduates. And we have Richard Irwin coming from PricewaterhouseCoopers, who's going to be talking about some of the things that corporations are looking for in recruiters. Richard is the head of graduate recruitment, and those of you who know Pricewaterhouse know that they recruit over 2,000 college graduates every year into their program. So they're one of the biggest, I think they are the biggest recruiter in the UK of college graduates. So again, we hope it's going to be a really rich discussion that builds on the work that we're doing today. Literature reviews are always challenging. They're especially challenging for us because we're trying to produce something that's concise, that teachers can read in a short amount of time, but that really just begins to capture some of these big ideas, and then we're hoping to build on them through the other parts of the process. I would invite all of you to respond to the literature review by filling in a consultation response form. This is an electronic form available online on the SIM website. The deadline for this is a week from today on the 4th of November. It's fairly simple. There are 3 responses, and they're based on visible thinking practices, which again come out of Harvard out of their Project Zero project. I see, I think, I wonder. It's asking you to look at that literature review and tell us what you see in it. Tell us what you think about it. Give us some additional questions you have that you don't think that we've addressed. All right, so without any kind of further delay, I'm going to introduce Mallory Perry. In a moment, Mallory's going to take over the screen. She's going to share her screen with us. But again, unfortunately, because of some technical difficulties, we're not going to be able to see Mallory. The benefit is this is what Mallory looks like right on the slide. And she looks as good on the Skype slide as she does in her picture. Mallory graduated from the Harvard Human Development Psychology program at the Graduate School of Education. She studied psychology before that at Brigham Young University with a focus on learning and cognition. She spent 2 years working at a Montessori school in Boston, and she is now part of the research team with Research Schools International, which is run by Dr. Christina Hinton, who has been the editor of this literature review. So I'm going to let Latifa come up and turn it all over so that Mallory can share her screen.
Right, Mallory, you've got the controls.
Okay. That's showing up for you?
Yep, okay, we can see it.
Great. All right. Thank you then. Introduction. I'm glad to be joining you here in Boston to talk a little bit about looking forward.
Mallory, you keep breaking up. The sound keeps breaking up. So, can you hear us?
Yep. I move a little closer.
Yes, please.
Is that better?
For now, yes.
All right. So in creating this literature review, we were directed by these 2 main questions. What kind of knowledge, skills, and dispositions will we flourish in the 21st century? And how do we teach those capabilities responsively? I'm going to talk a little bit later about what that teach responsively. But in order to do this, we kind of broke it into different categories. So we talked about the learning and the teaching in 3 categories, looking at academic knowledge, socio-emotional skills and knowledge, and then global and civic skills and knowledge as well. So let's go back. We in looking at these categories, they were directed very much by schools' vision and values. And we tried to provide information that would give vocabulary and understanding of theory, as well as frameworks to help guide the teaching. So from the method that we used looked, as I said, about these theories and key terms and definitions. We were aided by our wonderful research team. You can see here Myra Lalden and Suen Wang and Sujin Yoon. They are members of our research team here at RSI, and they worked with me in collecting this information and presenting it in a way that we hope can be an introduction, not a thorough understanding of all of these topics, but an introduction to theories, the key terms that you need to know to move forward and learn more about these 3 categories of academic, socio-emotional, global, and civic learning. In some cases, the literature review is intended to be a thorough summary of all of the literature in a particular topic, but as Ben mentioned, this wasn't so much intended to be a thorough summary as an introduction for the work that you, as teachers and administrators, will be doing as you think about your mission statement moving forward. So, looking forward, let's talk a little bit about these questions. First, in the academic context of knowledge and skill, a few years ago, the team of researchers led by Carol looked at publications about 21st century learning, and there are hundreds and hundreds of them, but they culled down what they could find and selected 15 of the most visible and most influential writings on 21st century skills. And this included posts and articles and briefs from research organizations. And Carol and her colleagues took this information and coded it and condensed it into 9 specific domains that they felt were supported by this body of work on important knowledge and skills for 21st century learners. 3 of these we categorize as academic knowledge. This includes core content knowledge, cross-disciplinary knowledge, and digital and information literacy. 3 of the domains we categorized as academic skills, and these include problem solving and critical thinking, communication and collaboration, as well as creativity and innovation.
Mallory,
We talked a little bit more about these. Carol and her colleagues pointed out that these are, in fact, not really new. Perhaps digital literacy is something that is new for 21st century learners, but the core content knowledge and communication, creative thinking, these are not new ideas. They've been around. And Carol mentioned that this should encourage us to focus on these because these will continue to be the foundational information that students need and foundational skills that they need to be successful in their lives. So to briefly go through this knowledge and skills, core content knowledge is in the traditional domains of science and math and history. But as Gardner pointed out, it's more than just having the information, but having a facility to use the information, using the ways of thinking, for example, using mathematical thinking to help solve problems, or using the scientists to approach collecting and evaluating information. Once students have developed this way of thinking using traditional domains, it follows that they're able to build cross-disciplinary knowledge, combining this core content knowledge and discipline. In order to connect, organize information, synthesizing information is an important skill that students will develop as they work on developing this cross-disciplinary knowledge. Digital literacy or information literacy, I'll just read this definition here by Carol and her colleagues. It's the ability to effectively and thoughtfully evaluate, navigate, and construct information using a range of digital technologies. Carol pointed out that the growth of technologies are constantly new tools available, new technologies available for students. So rather than focusing on using a particular tool as a 21st century skill, students need to learn this flexibility to be fluent in a digital world, to be able to continuously learn and understand how to use information and technologies that are available to them. The academic skills that they focus on is problem solving and critical thinking, which is essential for me in the workplace as well as further learning past secondary education. It's important for making informed decisions and working towards outcomes, towards goals. Using the cognitive skills that we just talked about, these important foundational knowledge is used in problem solving and critical thinking. In fact, the research suggested that the cognitive skills used in problem solving are some of the most important required for students to be successful after graduation. Communication and collaboration are the next two academic skills that they combine together. And while these have traditionally been important skills for students, I think that they're some of those skills most influenced by our digital community, that we have. Communication is no longer just reading and writing, but it's also being able to share through digital media, using blogs, using videos, even using Twitter as a method for communicating with people is an important skill that's really under that house of communication, but in the digital context. Collaboration as well is changed as students are able to collaborate with people across long distances. And piece of that collaboration is a flexibility to participate with people from different backgrounds, as well as that skill of participating, really taking that role as a participator. Creativity and innovation were the skills most universally identified in the literature as 21st century skills. As they pointed out, you can Google a lot of information, but students need to learn how to be creative and innovative. It's that developing their own novel and worthwhile products that is an essential skill for students to learn in the 21st century. Academically responsive teaching. Throughout these three, we're going to talk about responsive teaching, which is a method of flexible teaching where teachers work to meet both the needs and the strengths of students. One of the key facets of this is that teachers need to identify the needs and strengths of their students and then provide information in a variety of ways that meet those needs and the strengths of their students. In academically responsive teaching, we talk about two ways of thinking about this. The first is differentiation, which is a method of teaching as well as assessing that looks at students' needs and provides information in a variety of mediums. In this context, we talk about learning differences or learning challenges. There are students who have a difficult time learning at the same pace or in the same methods as their classmates, and it's important for teachers to be aware of those learning differences and to provide opportunities for their students to learn in the ways that work with their learning differences. The Universal Design for Learning framework that focuses on the use of technology for helping teachers present information in a variety of ways. So we're teaching not just visualizing information on a blackboard, but also videos, using hands-on, tactile activities. And the research suggests that not only do students' learning differences benefit from universal design for learning, but also are more engaged, more involved, have positive learning outcomes when teachers provide materials in a variety of methods. And in the literature review, there's some links and information for more information about the Universal Design for Learning framework. Looking kind of in the other direction, there are also classrooms whose learning is above and beyond that of the average class. They are often not engaged in lessons, or they're quickly bored and not participating because they don't feel that they're being stretched. So this idea of challenging stretch is used in some policy in the UK recently. It's also used in discussion of teaching students who need to be stretched a little bit more than the typical lesson. There's a theory called the zone of proximal development that was developed by Vygotsky that talks about the ways that students learn, and specifically focusing on learning just outside of where is comfortable for the students. So encouraging them to push them outside of that comfort zone of learning. This is called their zone of proximal development. Part of challenging touch is understanding the student's zone of proximal development, and that's an individual thing for each student, but learning how to teach them in that place where they're being pushed a little bit outside of their comfort zone. One framework for this is presented by a researcher that focuses on three important steps for teachers. First, planning. Next, structure and space. And then expectation. The researchers pointed out that in order to challenge and stretch students, teachers need to be planning a multiple approach to teaching, where they have a variety of methods that can stretch students in different ways. Stretching can involve the pace of the lesson, it can involve the depth of the lesson or the breadth of the lesson. So this structure and pace is making sure that the lesson is structured in a way that students can learn at their own pace, that they are able to work in that zone of proximal development, even if the person next to them is working at a different pace. It's also important that students are aware of their teachers' expectations. The teachers have high expectations and expect them to be challenging and stretching in their work, but students, it's important that students recognize those expectations. So let's move on to our next kind of categorization of this knowledge and skills, socio-emotional knowledge and skills. Resilience has recently been studied in a lot of research. Specifically, at Harvard, there's a program, the Center for the Developing Child. I don't know the exact name of that center, but resilience, though, has been studied that important trait that is recognized in students who have faced significant challenges. And these are challenges like illness and poverty. But researchers have found that students facing those, in some cases, are able to rise above regardless of how difficult their circumstances are. This resilience is supported by what researchers call protective factors. These can be adults in their lives who offer significant support, even so much as teachers who develop a personal relationship with students can feel that support from them. It can also be something like a student's sense of humor. That can be a protective factor that helps them develop resilience to challenges in life. So a student with resilience continues to work hard and to persevere even when there are challenges in their life that are significant. Another in the socio-emotional growth mindset. Carol Dweck developed this theory of mindset over the last decades. Growth mindset is the way of thinking about intelligence. Students with a growth mindset believe that their knowledge, their intelligence is flexible and that it grows as they work at it. The opposite of growth mindset is a fixed mindset, and this is the idea that you're just born with a certain amount of intelligence and you can't really change that. Students develop this mindset in a variety of ways in response to feedback that they receive. Research has suggested that students that are praised, smart, or brilliant, they develop a fixed mindset, thinking that smart is just part of who they are. However, students who are praised for working hard, they develop a growth mind, recognize that it is through their hard work to accomplish and progress in their work. Another important skill in the social emotional context, emotional and physical well-being. This can include students' physical as well as mental and emotional health. And research suggests actually that there's an important association between well-being and academic success. In fact, some of the countries who have recently been highlighted for their exceptional academic programs, Finland and Sweden, for example, as well as Australia, place a lot of emphasis on well-being, the well-being of their students. It's important that this involves not just the classroom, but the school environment, that the entire school environment provides opportunities for students to focus on that social and emotional well-being. This includes creating caring relationships. It's important that students feel valued and they feel supported and safe. And programs that help support and develop that emotional and physical well-being are associated with students performing better in the academic sphere. We wanted to talk about two different frameworks for social and emotional teaching. There are a wide variety of programs and curriculum to help support social and emotional learning. We just wanted to focus on two here. Responsive Classroom is a program that focuses very much on the how of socio-emotional teaching. It provides a lot of training and support as well as tools for teachers rather than just providing a curriculum. And it focuses on these ideas of building community and student-directed learning through several programs. So, for example, the morning meeting is something that teachers are trained in and they use in the classroom, and it's used to build community. Academic Choice is a program that allows students to direct their learning through various different learning activities in the classroom. Interactive modeling is a method of cooperative learning in which teachers and students work together to collectively evaluate and model behaviors. There has been some research on responsive classroom that have found that when it's implemented with fidelity, students show improvements in their skills as well as math and reading. The next framework that we looked at a little bit in the literature review is positive education, which is based on positive psychology. So this focuses on nurturing the well-being and promoting good mental health in students as well as in the whole community. It uses specifically seminars for students and different activities to help students recognize their own strengths and to develop skills, as they say, to help students feel good and do good in their community. Research in this program in positive education demonstrates that students not only improve in their engagement in the classroom and their enjoyment in school, but also in social skills such as empathy and cooperation, assertiveness, and self-control. There is a lot of room for continued research in social and emotional responsive teaching, but in our research we did find that there is a significant association between supporting the social emotional skills of students and their success in academic as well as skills. Moving on to our last domain of global and civic knowledge skills. In our research we focused on several different ways of looking at global and civic knowledge, helping students to develop global citizenship through global learning. Global learning can be defined as the knowledge and skills and attitudes that help students to understand cultures and world events and to appreciate that they are part of this global system. In some research from 2007 Gardner, they talked about three dimensions of global citizenship that include global learning, global understanding, global self, and global sensitivity. So one way of thinking about global learning is in these through global understanding, recognizing the global self as a participant or an actor in global affairs, and having a global sensitivity, which is recognizing that we impact the world around us. international mindedness is another important skill that students, as they come to understand and to recognize and to think about the world around them, they become curious and they develop a desire to learn more about the world around them. And as students develop this curiosity, intercultural empathy is an important skill for students to develop while put themselves in the shoes of people from different backgrounds and different cultures and to better understand that situation. Particularly in international schools, there's a tight connection between global citizenship and civic engagement because for students, their local community is very much of a global community. Some interesting research that we suggested that students learn most about engagement when they understand the relationship of the school in which they're participating, when they feel that their voice is heard, that they're treated justly in their school community, they better understand the importance of civic engagement and that they are part of in the local and global community. In teaching global and civic skills to students, we focused on two frameworks, but we wanted to talk specifically about an important theory about cultural or ethnic and racial identity. The research suggests that it is essential for teachers to recognize their own cultural and racial identity in order to be able to help their students to recognize their own identity. In order to develop this global citizenship, students need to feel that their own cultural and racial identities are recognized, celebrated, and teachers can do that through multicultural awareness. In the field of education, this term specifically refers to using multicultural materials, for example, stories from different cultures, including holidays from different countries. Using this multicultural material, students can feel that their own identities are celebrated. Really quickly, Oxfam talked about one framework for global and civic responsive teaching that uses the Learn, Think, Act model. So this is about learning to develop, to engage with global issues, to consider perspectives and seek for understanding. Thinking is about critically evaluating solutions in the context of other cultures, and acting is providing opportunities for students to participate, both individually and cooperatively, in global issues. The EdSteps task also provides a framework for global teaching called the Global Competency. It has four steps for teachers to identify engaging topics of global significance, and then they need to focus on global competency outcomes. Students need to be aware of what these outcomes are and have opportunities to perform their global competencies, to demonstrate that they're developing these. And then teachers need to have ongoing assessments that are centered on global competency. For more information about any of these frameworks, there's a lot more information as well as links to a lot of online resources in the literature review. I think now we have a little bit of time for some questions and answers.
Would anyone like to ask some questions of Mallory at this point?
I had a question, Mallory. When you were looking at the 6 different areas that were identified as being the prominent areas of learning, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. Were those all equally weighted, or did you find that they thought that some were more important than others, or that they should all be equally taught and focused on in schools, or what were the thoughts on that?
That's an interesting question. I don't think that the purpose of their research was to determine which were the most important. However, they did have at the end of their method this handy little chart where they talked about how many of the key papers talked about each of those different topics. I think that they felt the were of equal importance. There wasn't, we didn't include lesser importance, different categories of lesser importance, so noted from the research, but those main 6 that we talked about all considered essential skills for students.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question. I'm interested in knowing how these relate to student achievement and what the research says about that, if anything.
Excellent. That is a great question as well. In the literature review, we referred few cases to the effect of various programs on achievement. There is not research for each of the topics we talked about. So in some cases, we don't have rigorous answers that question. As far as social and emotional learning, the research does that positively students outcomes. I don't have numbers that was outside of the scope of the research that we were doing. But I think that each of these that we talked about has been shown to have positive impacts for students' outcomes in work and further education. Those are the main outcomes that we looked at. But there is research if you'd like to look into it more about for some of these that implement.
Mallory, can I add something to that just based on some of the things you said and some of the things that I also saw in the literature review? One of the things to keep in mind when you're asking that in question of impact is that a lot of these studies will be taking place in schools where there are specific interventions that had been introduced. And there's some big questions around fidelity of implementing those interventions across the school so that you could have a school, for example, that was using responsive classroom, but not using it with the correct kind of fidelity that you would expect. And so that even though the research shows that responsive classroom produces a certain kind of result, it only produces that result when it's done in a certain way. And I think that's one of the challenges of educational research across the board is that there are all these innovative approaches, but so much of it depends on how they're actually carried out. With each of the areas that Mallory looked at, her researchers have actually produced a supplement to the literature review, which we're going to publish in the Practitioner Insight Report. And what I asked them to do is I asked them to look specifically at a school that had taken all these different aspects and put that particular aspect at the core of what they did at a school. So, for example, something like positive education. As far as I know, Geelong International School in Australia is the only school that has developed their entire school model around this idea of positive education. And Martin Seligman from the University of Pennsylvania has been studying that school over the course of that period. Now, that school is going to have a completely different kind of outcome as a result of doing that because of the way that they've done it. And again, it's one of the things that make these things so challenging. These aren't like a pick and mix kind of thing. They're things that when you choose them, you do them with deliberation, you do them with fidelity, you do them in a way that you actually realize that result. Because, as we all know, you can take something that has proven results someplace else, put it in place, and not actually achieve the same result. So the idea of measuring outcome, a lot of the pieces that Mallory, there were several other studies that she talked about where she did have pieces that talked about the having an effect, but how you actually achieve that effect in the school is a real challenge. And again, that example, Mallory, I'm trying to think I think that there were 9 or 10 different schools who'd taken all these different elements that she was talking about and placed them at the heart of what they were doing. So everything from schools that place technology at the center of what they're doing to schools, all those different things. There are 10 short case studies that are going to be part of the Practitioner Insight Report. I hesitated to introduce those now because I thought that they might start closing down our discussion and kind of lead us in the way to say, oh, that's what we want to be. And again, a big part of the big things is to open our thinking, to be aware of those things, but to do it in a way that continues to open our thinking rather than kind of leads us in a particular direction. I think they're going to be wildly valuable to see before we go into the discussions around philosophy and expected school-wide learning results. So they're coming. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you. Do these approaches have assessments that they've used to give feedback on the approach?
Mallory, did you hear that one?
Yes. So that was outside of the purview of our research. I'm trying to think if I know of any specifically. I think that most of what we looked at was more of a broad category of programs. And so I'm not familiar with it, actually. I know, for example, that with our group here at Research Schools International, we've developed something for example, growth mindset. But those would be specific to programs that smaller programs within these larger categories that we talked about.
Again, if I could go back to those context setting pieces that I talked about, one of the things to recognize is that the nature of our vision and values is this transformative piece. And the transformative piece is the piece where the challenges aren't always clear. The innovations are just that, they're innovations. And sometimes they produce something and sometimes they don't produce something. So as we begin to think about how any of these schools actually measure those things, it's a huge area of research right now. This kind of interest in non-cognitive development, even though we've known about the importance of non-cognitive development for a very, very long time, the introduction of interventions and strategies that are specifically targeting non-cognitive development are all relatively new. And so those bodies of research are developing as time goes along. You know, the work that Angela Duckworth is doing on grit, the work that people like Carol Dweck have been doing on mindset, even though that work is fairly established, the use of those principles, the application of those principles in schools is still something that's rather new. It's at a very early stage. It's always going to be the challenge of a school like ours where we've really chosen to do something that's really ambitious. It's not going to be an off-the-shelf kind of answer for us. It's always going to be this really complex mix of doing our own ongoing research, creating our own data collection methods, creating our own methods for assessing outcome.
Not to mention having such a transit community in all international schools, it's hard to consistently measure the impact all the programs we have. So I think part of this is the idea that we can share ideas with other international schools and see what we're all doing, right, with everybody, not just within our own program.
Now, our definition of growth over time is a very different one than the growth over time that a school that has children for their entire academic career for a big part. Yes.
Hi, Mallory. I'm not just a parent, I'm not a teacher. From my point of view, all this is absolutely amazing, but the parents are going to get left behind. How are you going to teach the kids how to educate their parents?
That is really important point. And I know that there has been some work done specifically. I worked on a task force when I was in education, looking at social emotional learning. And there are programs out there that involve parents, as well as students. So I think that there are opportunities there to involve in this education of students. And there are even specific programs that are intended. We didn't talk about that in the literature review. That wasn't our focus. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind moving forward.
Yeah. Some of the programs like Growth Mindset actually have parent training pieces. Our responsive classroom piece that we use in our lower school here has parent training pieces that go along with it. But that's a really key thing because we need to think about this whole idea of who is a learner and who is a teacher. And young people and children are teachers as well as learners, and adults are both teachers and learners. And trying to figure out that complex mix of who's teaching who at what time. I think that it certainly is a school something that we aspire to and something that we really want to consider as we begin thinking about things like the philosophy and the expected school.
Especially as the kids get more faster on the computers, we're getting lost. They are getting left behind. And just a thought.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? Well, Mallory, I want to thank you very much I apologize for the technical difficulties. I know that we tested this thoroughly yesterday and it all worked yesterday, but that's just what technology does sometimes, I think. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, we have about 20 minutes left. And even though it's not a huge amount of time, it is a little chunk of time if we want to do like a 15-minute opportunity for you to get together with some people and discuss some smaller questions. And so I'm wondering at this point, does anyone here have a question that you would really value the opportunity of having a chance to discuss it with a couple of other people, just kind of in summary of what we've done today, or some additional thoughts that you have about things that maybe were left out of this that you'd like to talk to someone about?
I had a few thoughts. I read through it last night, and Mallory said it too. I like that some of the ideas here are, we're not coming up with completely new ideas into education, but it's more like emphasizing ones more specifically, like social emotional and the technology, and really emphasizing things in a different way too. Which is kind of nice. Having said that, like you're talking about, Alan, technology is shooting up, and so often I find like the kids are ahead of me, and trying to keep up as a teacher is interesting too. So I kind of, looking at all this and finding it absolutely fascinating, at the same time wondering how do we as educators and teachers will have to make sure we're keeping up with all these different factors. It's really good information and good research. So, I think how do we start incorporating this correctly? What are the next steps, the next practical steps too? Sorry, I know it's kind of vague. I was just, it's a big thing,
So I tried to summarize that in a shorter sentence. So, this doesn't have to be exact, because if some people like to discuss it, you can expand it as you're discussing. So what aspects of teaching and learning could or should we emphasize based on the things we heard, and what might some of those next steps be?
Right.
Great question. Anyone else have another question that they helps?
There's a lot of information there in a lot of different categories. So where do our priorities lie, and are they differentiated according to need? That either by subject, grade level, child development, those kinds of things. Because it seems to me that they all are equally as interesting and purposeful. But how do we know what's best for us at what time?
Okay. Those are two really good big questions. And given the fact that we have only a short amount of time, would anyone object if I said that those are, let's start with those two questions? So if you had to choose one of those two questions to discuss, would everyone be comfortable with one of those? So we have what aspects of teaching and learning could or should we emphasize, and what might the next steps be? And now it's this question of what are our priorities and what's best at what time? Both interesting questions.
How are they different? One's what are our priorities, and one is what should we do first?
They're rather similar.
Because I want to talk about both of them, and then I'm like, wait, I have the same stuff to say about it.
Maybe one just extends it slightly because it puts a time frame on it, the priority, but they definitely, they definitely are related.
So if people would generally do both of those, does anyone have a question that's really different from those?
I mean, I would say, how do you get the information that you want to put across? I mean, you must have the research that says we're going to dump this lot because we don't like it, and we're going to take this lot on because we do like it. And therefore, you've narrowed it down for us to worry about other stuff over here. Is that a continually evolving space in your head as to what is good and what is bad to put forward to the school?
That's a really good question. We were just having a discussion today about how challenging it is that we oftentimes introduce a lot of things that when you see them happen, you think, wow, that's really creative, and wow, those kids are having a great time. But what do we know about what's actually coming out of those? And you need that kind of information to decide, is this something we keep doing, or something that was interesting but didn't really produce very much in terms of kind of learning we were looking for? Those are two really great questions. Again, in the interest of time, can I ask, I'm going to ask the people who posed the questions actually to convene the discussion. Alex and Krista, you guys can do this together. I'm going to ask one of you guys to go over into the room on this side, and if you'd like to discuss this, again, tell us what your question is. I've paraphrased it, I probably did it badly, but essentially your question you're going to be talking about is
what aspects of teaching and learning could or should be emphasized, and what are our next practical steps moving forward?
Okay, and our second question is something like,
How do you decide what works and what is good or bad?
okay, if you'd like to discuss this second question, please stay here. If you'd like to discuss Alex and Crystal's question, please go to the group on the side. At about 3 minutes too, I'm going to ask you to come back and just really give us a quick synopsis of what you talked about. Okay? So it gives us about 15 minutes. Ken, is it possible to have the people who pose the questions just do some really quick, feedback to the group in terms of the kinds of things you're talking about? Not detail, but maybe just give us a flavor of the range of things that came up in your conversations.
Our range of conversation was the new ideas you're bringing into the school. Specifically, I guess, if you like, we use Google Docs that you're going to push out to the teachers and then on to the parents. The idea that I was trying to get across was that in the past we've kind of been trying to catch up with the school, and I think it should be the other way around. The school should be pushing at us, saying, "Come to us, we'll re-educate you, and you will not leave this room until you understand," sort of thing. Because it really, it's amazing. I've been president for 5 weeks now or something like that. So it's been an education as to how people perceive the school and how the school is being perceived. And I think there is a big void as to how we push stuff backwards and forwards to each other. And you know, if you are going to bring in new ideas, there's nothing wrong with telling the parents this is the new idea. You know, get on board, have a bit of research, or come to the ILC and see our research as to why we got to where we are. I think that would be really good.
It's interesting that just like in the school, we found that peer tutoring is really important for students. And also we found that when we have done innovations technically, we found that teacher to teacher, teacher teaching teacher, if you can raise 20% of the community up so they can reach out to the other people. And it also has been the same thing with parents with regard to various technologies, so that someone like Dan is completely key.
Absolutely. Dan will be lost. Maybe Dan
can explain that. I mean, it's one of you who can explain it to yourselves better than any of us can. Although we have teachers who are parents, and that might help too. You know? Right. But it's interesting to say, like, if we can find a mechanism for launching a small amount of expertise into the community and let that start to propagate, because it really is, word of mouth is like the most effective teacher in some ways. And no matter what form we package the information, like we were talking about the need to consider all the constituencies that are impacted or affected by projects, so that when your kid comes home and says, when you say, "What did you do at school today?" he says, "I killed trolls." You know what that's part of? So there's a good reason for that, but it sounds a bit frivolous, but there's a really good reason for it. But if we think about that, and also the pieces of data that we're going to use to assess the package and that informative analysis that we're going to do for all those constituencies, that if we consider that, then having little small groups of people that could prove our concepts could be really useful to us. So that we always produce a set of artifacts that was looked at by members of each community. Increasing the awareness is in a rippling way, as opposed to like waiting for the communication to be perfect. Maybe using Agile a little bit, you know.
Fantastic. If I can put it in a plug for later on in May, on the Center for Inspiring Minds, we work with 10 teams of teachers over the course of every year who are implementing innovative approaches to teaching and learning. And in May, they come together one evening in an after-school and do presentations on those things that they've been doing in classrooms, maybe with your kids, depending on what grade level and what the project is. But it gives you a really good idea of the kind of innovations that teachers are looking at bringing into the program. New things coming online. Yeah. Crystal, else go ahead.
I feel like we got just broader. It's very good question. It's very philosophical, but I think what we discussed was just to reiterate the question is how to prioritize what we have and what do we already have, and how do we develop that in the new in the context of the old. And we started to talk about the other campuses and the DOPA's expected school-wide learning results, and how that would fit into our context. And I think, from my perspective, what I gleaned from it is that we were looking at another set of standards that run alongside our concurrent academic standards
that we adopt in various disciplines and at various different divisions, and those will work together. So we have some standards that are non-academic, but they help us monitor some of the things that we're developing as far as disposition and sort of like the social emotional element of what we're teaching, because it is as important and feeds into the academic side of things as much.
We also talked about also looking at what we really are doing right now at the moment, just kind of getting like an audit on where we are, what progress we've made in all these different areas we've been talking about today, and where we feel our needs are. Is it an approach we'll need to take by age? Do we look at the bottom and introduce things and move up as the kids get older? Or do we want to look at specifics, just where we are across the school, and we want to look at how the other schools are doing it, do it the same way as the other campuses?
Yeah, and we've got to be aware that we're looking into the future, but how far do we look into the future, and we don't want to, as a result, ignore what we have, and that as it evolves in the short term, the next 10, 15, 2 years.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm going to first apologize for keeping you past my time, and then I'm going to thank you all for coming and engaging in the discussion this afternoon. It's been really terrific, and the people who come to our seminars are always kind of a self-selecting group of the people who are really keen and really motivated. But I hope that what you also will be are kind of spokespeople and ambassadors for this process, and go back and talk to teachers and talk to parents and talk to students about the kinds of things we're working on, some of the things we talked about tonight, because as we work through the year, we're really working to build momentum as we work toward those education summits where we're going to be having these bigger discussions about the philosophy and about the expected school learning as well. So we're going to continue to create opportunities for everyone to feed into those, whether they're through consultation pieces or private reviewing pieces or whatever that is. So again, thank you all for coming tonight and being a part of the process, and look forward to seeing you as the year goes, this year goes through in other events.
Thank you.